All right, welcome. So we're going to be talking about newspapers today, great resources, and hopefully this will record well to the cloud, and then if anybody needs to reference it in coming months, they can. So I'm going to just do some screen sharing here. Let's see. Okay, whoops. Got to move this up. All right, so we'll start with some of the main newspaper sites for the nation. And many of these have newspapers for other countries in the world as well. Obviously, newspapers.com. Can you see my screen, Scott?
I can now. I couldn't.
Oh, okay. Okay. Just want to make sure. So newspapers.com, one of the best newspaper overall sites if you're looking for something that you may want to subscribe to, because some of these are subscription sites and some are not. Newspapers.com is probably your best overall bet if you're researching in the States. And they have a great partnership with Ancestry, which will connect obituaries, and they're starting to go through other historical articles and connect those to ancestor profiles as well. So when you do a search on Ancestry, it may bring something up. Now, I have a subscription to newspapers.com. It's my understanding that on Ancestry, if you come up with an article that you can link to on newspapers.com, that you still have to have a subscription to get there. Is that right for you, Scott?
To really see the article.
Yeah, you have to
look at the
okay.
OCR reader.
You can't bring them up if you don't. Have you had? Okay, I just want to make sure, because I have a subscription. I've always been able to bring them up, but I don't know what they've done now with the Ancestry account, if it includes newspapers. I don't think it does, but they do link to those articles just to whet your your appetite. So newspapers.com, probably the best overall. And then we have, can you see this? Genealogy Bank. Are you seeing that on your screen? Let's see. So this is another good one. It is a subscription site. It has some overlap with newspapers.com, but it has a lot of other things that are not on newspapers. So just be aware as I kind of go through these 5 main newspaper sites. Incidentally, the index to obituaries on this particular site, Genealogy Bank, those are on Family Search. And again, you can bring them up in the index, but you'll need a subscription to access them. So, and then we have Newspaper Archive. Again, many of the newspapers from the country, there's some overlap with newspapers.com and some with Genealogy Bank. And that's why I bring all of these up, because if you're really searching for people and you just search one site, you may miss them in another. And that's been the case with many of the searches I've made. So you just have to be aware of what's out there. And obviously it's going to be really pricey if you have a subscription to all, but many offer a trial period. You can get all your searches done and then cancel before you decide to pay. But newspapers.com still trumps any of these. The next one, Chronicling America. This is the Library of Congress digital newspaper site. It's excellent. It's federally funded. It's free, and it has lots of different sources. Right here, you can see it. Their newspapers begin in 1756 and go till about 1963, and they're always adding new things. So this is a good one to check out if you don't want to pay anything. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this when I get into some of the other newspaper sites, because this is connected to some of the others. And then we have, let's see, Find My Past. This site is not specifically newspapers. This is for the UK. and it has, you know, a lot of vital records, has census records. It also has newspapers for the UK, and it's excellent. I've pulled up obituaries for my Scottish peeps, and so this is a great resource if you're looking in the UK. It is also a subscription, but you can search the index and you'll know something's out there. If you know, it'll give you like a little snippet, and then you're going to have a subscription if you want to access the information. But it's great, especially British newspapers, and they begin in like the late 1600s. So pretty
Cathi,
early on.
I was just going to say that church members can get free access by going.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. That's great to know.
Yeah. Yep.
That is awesome. All right. So something else to tell you about. So then these are kind of broad across the country databases, and they have some for other countries, each one of these sites. But then what you get into are individual state sources, and they're very specific to each state. And so what you have are most states, in fact, I think all in the country, are participating in what's called the National Digital Newspaper Program. It's NDNP, and you'll see that kind of around these various sites. But only some of the digitized newspapers from each of these states are on newspapers.com and these other sites. So you can't rely entirely on any one of those sites. And so that's why we're getting into some of these other sources. So the NDNP, it's this project between the Library of Congress, the site that we just talked about, Chronicling America, which is the Library of Congress newspaper site, and the National Endowment for the Humanities. So every state has like a federal grant in order to digitize their newspapers. And they're focusing on digitizing, obviously, just American newspapers with this grant, and particularly those between about 1840 and about 1930. Beyond that, you know, they're just focusing on, and some of that is for what they say privacy reasons, you know, but I mean, there are so many other newspaper sites that are out there already with these sources. And so that's that. They're partnering up, like I said, with the Library of Congress. Now, you kind of get hit and miss with each individual state site, and I'll talk about those. Newspapers.com, like I said, has some of those digitized newspapers. Some of the bigger cities, the states will give them access, but there are lots of smaller cities, little towns, tiny newspapers that are digitized. And for those, most states have a digital newspaper search that is at either their state library site, their Department of Archives and History site, or their state historical society site. So I'll show you some examples of those, because if you're looking, for example, so here's Wyoming. This is their digital newspaper collection, and it's great. They only go up to about 1922, but my dad is from Wyoming and my mother's from Brooklyn, New York. Don't ask me how they ever connected, but they're Wyoming. He's from a town of that used to be about 400 people. And so they had this little town newspaper, and they've digitized a lot of those issues on this site. And it's wonderful because his parents were from there as well, and he had some grandparents that were there. So it's been great to pull up, you know, all these wonderful, what I would like to call the meat that goes on the bones, right? Because newspapers are, you know, you've got obituaries and weddings, anniversaries, births, court cases, historical events. But maybe the most valuable things that you can find back in the day were in the social columns. And that, you know, communities were so small that they used to publish, you know, Mr. and Mrs. Smith are going to visit her sister in Cleveland, you know, Mary Jones, because they would follow and keep tabs on everybody. And so it's wonderful to see just these little mentions in the social columns of newspapers, because you can establish relationships between families. So that has been invaluable. I mean, of course, vital mentions, deaths, births, marriages are critical. But don't forget to look at the social columns for the newspapers that your ancestors, for the towns that your ancestors would have lived in. So this is just one example. And this is available through the Wyoming State Library. So again, State Historical Society, State Library, Department of Archives and History. Each state has one or many sites. Maybe all three, maybe just one, but you're going to want to check to see what kind of digital newspapers they have. Here's the Minnesota Digital Newspaper Hub. Some states make all of their digitizations available to either the Library of Congress site or newspapers.com. Alabama is a state I've worked in a lot, and they make all of their newspapers available to newspapers.com. All of their digitized newspapers, I should say. But others do not. Minnesota makes some available and not all. So you don't want to think that you've covered all your bases with just one of these newspaper sites. So I just wanted you to be aware of these state resources. California is one that has a great digital collection. They make them available to the Library of Congress site, but not newspapers.com. So it's very hit and miss. And this is one I've told Scott about. Let's see if I can get there. Okay. Can you see this? New York Historical Newspapers. This is a great site. You can research by county, or you can research the entire state at one time. They have an advanced search, so there's lots of different parameters you can search, as do most of these sites. And this even includes little village newspapers, because in New York, a lot of records are kept at the village level. There's, you know, it's very different in New England and New York. So I thought this was great. And this is through the New York library system. And then there's this site. And I have loved this site. It's a kind of a funky, strange looking newspaper site, but boy, is it great. And I have a lot of New York ancestors, so I have found this to be invaluable. So interestingly enough, this don't let the look of this site throw you. About half of the images in this site are from New York State, with a significant amount of those coming from Oswego County, which includes Fulton. But the other half are from other states in the country. So this site, if you're looking for New York people, it's great, but don't neglect to search here. They have some great stuff that the other New York historical newspaper site does not have. So it does not cover the same newspapers. There may be a little overlap, but it doesn't cover the same as that other New York digital or historical news site. And incidentally, the guy who started this site, he began digitizing back issues of just his local newspaper, and with borrowed digitization equipment. And since then, he has invested in scanners and servers, and he has began began digitizing newspapers from all over New York and all over the country. And so now this site has more than 51 million digitized newspaper pages, all started from one guy, like in his garage, and over 1,000 different newspapers. So it really, I mean, it could have been put with the other national newspaper collection sites. I just think, you know, so often when we're doing family history, we check vital records, but we neglect to find the interesting things about people's lives, the meat, and it's out there. It's out there, and there are things that we just have no idea about. I was able to, just from a newspaper article, and this would have been about 1892, we had been researching an ancestor who was born in 1768, and he died at a ripe old age in the 1850s. This was in Atlanta, Georgia. And it was just by happenstance, I was searching in the Georgia state newspaper site, and lo and behold, here's an article in 1892 about the largest land ejectment court case at the state Supreme Court about this guy's land. Okay, so this is, you know, like 45 years after the guy dies, there's a newspaper article about a state Supreme Court court case. So we went to the archives in Atlanta. This has been years ago. They had not indexed the state Supreme Court case files, and they had case files that survived, but they did bring out banker boxes with paper files that we spent all day going through, file by file. And we found the case file for this case, and there was over 100 pages of testimony, and the things that we learned from the things that we learned about this guy's life and about his ancestry, because the people who testified were grandchildren and in some cases children that were still living. It was amazing. And just from a newspaper article, because those state Supreme Court cases at that time when we went had not been indexed yet. So you never know what you're going to find in a newspaper. And anyway, this is just a smattering of what's out there. There are lots of other newspaper sites that are local. And just thought I'd throw this out there, and we can talk about questions that anybody has.
I do have a question, which may be hard to answer. How did you come across all these different sites originally? Because, you know, I've looked for things and I'll stumble on something, but I haven't broadened it out or taken it as far as you have.
Well, you know, I have some LDS ancestry on my dad's side, but my mother's a convert, and so she has a very colorful family history. And they're in the deep South, and they're in New York, and nobody had done any research. You know, when she joined the church, she was the first one, and she did a lot. And then my sisters and I, you know, began researching early on. But we had to really, it wasn't readily available. There were so many lines that were just dead ends that we had to really scour and look to other sites besides just Ancestry or Family Search. And back in the day, none of this was available, you know. And so we would go to newspapers at the Department of Archives and History in Montgomery, you know, in Alabama, and page through volumes of newspapers. And in some cases they had been microfilmed, so we'd be scanning the microfilm readers, and we would find great information. And so we developed a great respect for newspapers. I'll never forget, my sister and I went to this little town in Alabama, and we asked, after we had gone through all the court records, we were still kind of at a loss. We asked, the courthouse kind of doubled as, it doubled as like 4 different things. It was such a tiny town that it was like the newspaper, it was like a, I can't remember what else, but everything was housed in this one building. And we said, well, where are the newspapers? Well, they're in Bob Jones' chicken coop right now. We couldn't find a place when the flood happened, so we haven't gotten them back out, and we thought, this is what happens to things, things, you wonder, how things disappear. Well, I'll never forget a story I was told by some gals who were working in the Family History Center in Paulsbo, where we used to live, near Bainbridge Island. And they had returned from a mission in Mobile, Alabama, and that just happens to be where some of my lines go to. And they said, when they thought the church had digitized just about everything that the county had in Mobile. But lo and behold, while they were on their mission, some guy died, and his son found like 8 volumes of court records in his attic. And who knows why they were up there, but these things happen all the time. And this couple, they were on a senior mission, and they were doing some digitizing, or not digitizing, but this was, they were microfilming at the time, and they ended up microfilming these records, and it was shocking to them where they were found. So I have seen a lot of, strange sources out there on the internet, but you have to go to the ends of the earth to find your people, So it's just been over years, Scott.
Thank you. Yeah, I like that phrase, go to the ends of the earth. It has some scriptural connotations, but, I'd never thought of it as, we are literally going all around the world digitally, finding all these things.
Absolutely. It's pretty amazing. I mean, and Richard could tell us a lot more. I mean, it's pretty phenomenal what the church is doing. And he's, people who are actually doing the work with this, they're the heroes. I mean, they're making these things available. And, we had a senior couple in our stake, our Silverdale stake in Washington, and he was working on the character recognition. The church at that time was putting together a way to scan Chinese documents, and he was part of the team working on character recognition. He was fluent in Mandarin and just things like that. Just the team, he said, the team is unbelievable. Just the background that goes into this, each of these capabilities that the church has now. It's pretty unbelievable. Anyway, I think I will stop recording.